"Fix my Ferrari, and I'll marry you." She laughed like it was the cruelest joke, never expecting the grease-stained mechanic to take her seriously. The red beast coughed and sputtered in the middle of the street, its engine gasping like a wounded animal. Her diamond bracelet caught the morning light as she tossed the keys onto his workbench, eyes sharp, daring him to fail. He didn't flinch. His fingers, blackened by years of labor, traced the hood as if he were touching sacred steel. The world saw an impossible bet. He saw a promise waiting to be kept, and in that moment their lives began to shift, gear by gear, toward a road neither of them had imagined. Stay with me, because sometimes the most absurd challenges hide the most beautiful truths. The streets of East Los Angeles were still half asleep when Alex Rivera rolled up the shutter of his grandfather's workshop. The sign above the door, Rivera Motors, was faded, the paint cracked from decades of sun and rain. Most people walked past it without a second glance, but for those who knew, the shop was more than a place to fix cars. It was a sanctuary, a cathedral of pistons, steel, and memory. Inside, the air smelled of oil, gasoline, and old wood. Shafts of light pierced through the dusty windows, landing on a collection of tools lined up with almost obsessive care. A rusty clock ticked on the wall, its second hand dragging like a tired heartbeat. For Alex, this place wasn't just a job. It was his inheritance, his identity, and the only constant in a life that had never promised much. He was 31, broad-shouldered, with hands that looked permanently stained by grease, no matter how much soap he used. His dark hair curled just above his ears, and there was always a shadow of stubble on his jaw, as if shaving were a battle he chose not to fight. People in the neighborhood respected him quietly. He wasn't loud, he wasn't flashy, but when an engine coughed its last breath, Alex was the man who could bring it back to life. That morning, he was bent over a 1968 Mustang, listening more than looking. To Alex, cars spoke. Their rattles, their silences, their stutters, each was a sentence in a language few could understand. He closed his eyes and placed his palm against the hood. "Talk to me," he whispered, as if coaxing a secret from a stubborn friend. The car responded with a faint vibration, a murmur he recognized instantly. He smiled to himself. Timing belt. Not a disaster, just a matter of listening closely. It was then he heard it. The sound that didn't belong. A growl, deep and proud, rolling down the cracked asphalt outside. Except the growl wasn't smooth. It was broken, uneven, like a lion with a wounded throat. Alex straightened, wiping his hands on a rag that was already more black than white. Through the open door he saw it, a Ferrari, gleaming red under the harsh California sun, crawling down the street as if dragging invisible chains. The sight stopped him cold. He had seen Ferraris before, posters in magazines, rare appearances at car shows, the occasional customer passing by to brag, but never like this, never this close, and never this broken. The car staggered to a halt right in front of his workshop, and when the driver's door opened, the morning seemed to hold its breath. She stepped out in heels that had no business touching cracked concrete. Her hair was a golden waterfall that caught the light, her green eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses that screamed money. The dress she wore looked like it had been torn straight from a runway, white fabric brushing against the grease-stained sidewalk like an insult. Valerie Mendoza. He didn't know her name yet, but the world around her bent as if announcing it. Her expression was fury wrapped in elegance. She slammed the door shut and stood still for a moment, scanning the workshop with visible disgust. "This is the famous Rivera Motors?" Her voice dripped with irony, the kind that could cut a man's pride in half. Alex didn't answer right away. He was still caught between the miracle of seeing such a machine and the absurdity of it being here, in his forgotten corner of the city. He finally stepped forward, calm, unhurried, as if approaching a wounded animal that might bite. "Depends on who's asking," he said, his voice low, steady. She removed her sunglasses with a snap, revealing eyes that could freeze a room or melt it in an instant. Everyone has failed. Los Angeles, San Francisco, even New York. And I flew it to Italy. Maranello itself. They all said the same thing. Impossible. Her lips twisted into a bitter smile. And yet, here I am, at this place. Alex ignored the sting in her tone. He circled the Ferrari slowly, his fingertips grazing the paint with reverence. He didn't look at her, didn't even ask her name. His attention was entirely on the machine. "It's not impossible," he murmured half to himself. "It just hasn't found the right hands." That was when she laughed, short, sharp, cruel. "Really? You? A neighborhood mechanic who smells like gasoline and cheap coffee? Do you know how much this car is worth?" She crossed her arms, the diamonds on her bracelet catching the light like tiny suns. $2 million. More than your entire life, I'm sure. Alex finally looked at her, meeting her gaze without flinching. His eyes were dark, calm, unreadable. "It's still a machine," he said softly. "And machines talk to me." Something in his tone unsettled her. She tilted her head, as if reassessing him, then shook it off with another laugh. "Fine. I'll make this interesting. Fix my Ferrari in 48 hours, and I'll marry you." She threw the words like a dagger, certain it would wound his pride. "But when you fail, and you will fail, I'll take back my car and my time." The silence that followed felt electric. The city noise outside seemed to vanish, leaving only the ticking of that old clock on the wall. Alex's lips curved into a small, steady smile. Not cocky, not desperate, just sure. 48 hours, he repeated. "But you'll call me Alex, not mechanic, not grease monkey, just Alex." For the first time since she arrived, Valerie faltered. Her confidence cracked, if only for a second. She didn't know if she was amused, offended, or intrigued. She tossed the keys onto his workbench, the metal clattering like the sound of fate sealing itself. "Good luck," she said coldly, before turning on her heel and walking away. Alex caught the keys in one hand, his thumb tracing the prancing horse emblem. He looked at the Ferrari, its hood still trembling with an uneven heartbeat. Then he glanced at the retreating figure of the heiress who had just thrown him into the most absurd bet of his life. He exhaled slowly, almost a laugh. "Guess we're both broken," he muttered to the machine. "Let's see if we can fix each other." And with that, he opened the hood. The shop changed when the shutter came down. Outside, traffic kept grinding past and life went on. Inside, time narrowed to a single purpose. Alex set the keys beside the old clock, its stuttering second hand tapping like a metronome for his heartbeat. He wiped the bench, cleared a space, laid out tools in a precise row. Torques, hex, feeler gauges, oscilloscope leads coiled like sleeping snakes. He didn't rush. Rushing made hands stupid. He needed them steady. He started by listening. Not the dramatic kind, not the rev it and hope kind. A gentle ignition. The engine coughed awake with a wounded growl and then stumbled, breath catching on an invisible snag. Alex leaned in, eyelids lowered, reading vibrations through his forearms pressed against the fender. Notes split where they should have fused. A singer on perfect pitch, with a ghost whispering offbeat behind the melody. "Show me," he said, barely above a breath. He shut it off and pulled the floor jack under the chassis, steel on concrete squealing a protest. The Ferrari rose, inch by patient inch. He slid beneath it on the creeper, the underbody smooth as a spaceship's hull. Heat radiated around him, the living warmth of a machine that wanted to run. He traced lines with a flashlight, found nothing dramatic, no leaks, no mangled harness, no lazy clamp. It would never be obvious. Obvious had been hunted to extinction in Maranello. He wheeled out, stood and rolled his shoulders. The clock ticked, 46 hours and change. He hooked up diagnostic gear anyway, not because he believed the screen more than his body, but because numbers helped him argue with the world later. The laptop spat graphs and tidy colored lines, like a doctor's chart for a patient who swore they felt fine. Everything fell within tolerances. Everything looked good, better than good, the kind of perfect that made him distrust it. He switched the laptop off. "Okay," he murmured, opening the engine bay like lifting the lid on a grand piano. The smell of warm metal and faint ozone rose. He worked his way inward with the care of a surgeon, labeling, photographing, laying each bolt in an egg carton with letters scrawled in Sharpie. His hands moved in a rhythm, learned from men who taught him to put faith in order, the way his grandfather had set coffee cups. Handle east, never west, before starting work. The way his father had polished a wrench after every job, whether it needed it or not. Respect made better repairs. That's what they'd said. Respect and listening. Across town, Valerie's world did not slow. It spun faster, as if motion could drown out discomfort. The Mendoza building's glass facade flashed the afternoon sun, and inside, everything smelled like citrus and money. Assistants flowed in and out with tablets, slides, reports. Her father's voice echoed from a corner office, a low, decisive instrument tuned to the pitch of mergers and regulatory winds. Valerie pretended to read a deck. She caught herself rereading the same sentence 3 times. Her phone buzzed with the kind of messages that used to wire her with dopamine. "A PR friend. You really left the Ferrari with a corner shop. This is a headline waiting to happen." A cousin. Dad's asking questions. Brace. A private club acquaintance sent a photo of a champagne flute captioned, "Bet still on." She locked the screen. The glow of the device lingered in her palm like a ghost she couldn't shake. "Val?" Her father stood in the doorway, tie loosened, smile tight enough to cut. "You're meeting with the board tomorrow. Are you prepared?" "Always," she said, switching to autopilot, the polished version of herself sliding into place. Everything about her was curated, the silk blouse with invisible stitching, the heels that made a quiet sound on expensive floors, even the bent paperclip she used as a bookmark in case someone came in and needed to see she was reading something. A life of presentation. He walked in, closed the door softly, and lowered his voice. "I heard a story. Tell me it's not true." He didn't say mechanic, but the word hung between them like an odor he couldn't stand. She felt a heat climb her throat. The old reflex, snap back, dominate the room, rose first, then faded. She could still smell the shop in her memory, oil, dust, the honest kind of dirt. "It's my car," she said, "my choice." "That car is a brand," he replied, "and you are a brand. We do not hand our brands to amateurs." "He's not an amateur." It came out too fast. She saw the surprise blink across her father's face. "He's different," she added, which sounded childish even to her. Different. What did that mean to a man who measured people by quarterly outcomes? "Wrap it up," he said gently, paternal and final. "Some stories you can end before they start." After he left, she stared at her reflection in the dark window. A woman who had learned to carry sharpness like a knife. A woman who, an hour ago, had laughed at a stranger in grease-stained clothes because that was the shape of her armor. "Fix my Ferrari and I'll marry you." Content for a scandal, not a life. Except he hadn't flinched. Except the way he had touched the car hadn't been theater. She felt ridiculous suddenly, with the weight of her own diamond bracelet on her wrist like a tiny handcuff. She pulled up a private browser and typed Rivera Motors. Photos surfaced, grainy shots of a young man bending over an engine bay, a faded article from a niche car forum talking about a kid who can hear timing through the floor. There was a comment thread about a '73 Porsche that had left his shop better than factory. Somewhere in the noise, she found a black and white picture of the workshop from the 1970s, Grandfather Rivera standing stiff beside a Buick, face serious and proud. Her heart did a small, traitorous tilt. The story she wanted to end had already started writing itself. Back in East LA, the evening light turned the dust in the shop to glitter. Alex had a dozen tiny parts lined up like chess pieces. He worked in pockets of silence, punctured by the click of a torque wrench and the whisper of a ratchet. He didn't notice hunger until his stomach talked louder than the engine. He ignored it. He watched instead for the slight, nearly imperceptible misalignment where electric grace met combustion muscle. The handoff between two worlds, like a relay where the baton slips a fraction late and the fastest runners in history lose by a breath. He fired the engine again and watched the oscillations dance on a handheld scope, not trusting the laptop's polished charts. He listened, syncing what he saw with what his body felt. Something moved out of time, not wrong enough to trip alarms, just wrong enough to make beauty stumble. He killed the ignition, set the tool down, and leaned on the fender, palms flat, head lowered. The clock's second hand clicked. The night pressed its face to the window. He reached for the smallest culprit, the sort of component that never got headlines, a sensor buried under a tangle, more rumor than part. He cradled it in his hand, thumb stroking the housing like a talisman. If you could teach a thing to feel a rhythm, you could misteach it too. A nudge here, a whisper there. 3 milliseconds of arrogance from a god-tier machine was still arrogance. He smiled, just a little, the half-moon kind his mother used to call trouble. There you are. His phone buzzed on the workbench, breaking the spell. A message from an unknown number. He wiped his hands on the rag and picked it up. Is my car still breathing? V. He pictured her, not as porcelain in a glass tower, but as a woman alone in a room that smelled like citrus, staring at a phone and hating herself for caring. He typed, then backspaced, then typed again. It wants to sing. I'm teaching it the beat. A pause. Then her reply, do you always talk like that? Only to things I respect. The 3 dots bloomed, vanished, bloomed again. 48 hours, she sent finally. Don't make me regret my joke. He set the phone down. The message didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a hinge. Alex adjusted his lamp, breath settling. He laid out the delicate calibration tools, the magnifier, the patience. Somewhere outside, a siren wailed and then softened into distance. Inside, the shop held its breath with him. He would not rush. Precision was devotion. Devotion took the time it needed. He bent over the heart of the car, the smallest piece in his fingers, and listened for the missing half-beat that could turn a cruel laugh into a promise. By midnight, the shop had pared itself down to bone and breath. The air was the temperature of old coffee. Streetlight leaked through the blinds in thin gold bars. Somewhere outside, a dog barked once and then thought better of it. Inside, Alex stood over the open Ferrari like a priest at a vigil. He didn't look heroic. He looked patient. A patience so steady it could be mistaken for boredom by anyone who'd never had to earn a miracle. He'd mapped the obvious. He'd ruled out the grand failures, the glamorous culprits that gave technicians good stories. What remained was the kind of problem that wasn't a problem at all until beauty required it to be solved, a stutter between worlds. On paper, the data smiled. In the air, the machine winced. He reached for the scope again. The handheld had a hairline crack across its plastic like a healed scar. He clipped leads with a gentleness that would have made sense if he were touching a living vein. He idled the engine just enough to let it murmur. Oscillations scribbled across the little screen, bright green on black, clean, too clean. He turned his head away and listened instead, as if trusting one sense dulled the other. There. It wasn't even sound. Not exactly. It was a feeling that slid through the metal and into his palm, a breath that arrived a blink late. The baton pass from electric to combustion was nearly perfect, nearly. Dominion lost on a technicality. 3 milliseconds, maybe less. That's what it felt like. Time small enough to be laughed out of a boardroom and big enough to make Grace trip over its own feet. He shut the engine down. The sudden quiet felt enormous. "Not wrong," he said to the car. "Just out of time." He loosened a bracket, then another, peeling back layers the way you undress a truth that doesn't want to be seen. He reached the little sensor, wedged like a secret under the harness, a squat thing with a generic face. You'd never photograph it for a brochure. It told the system when to trust electrons and when to trust gasoline, measured tiny truths in vibrations no one else cared to feel. If it blinked late, the song became a cough. And if a song coughs long enough, people forget what it was supposed to sound like. He cradled it in his hand and thought, not for the first time, of his grandfather. The old man with the tobacco voice who'd sworn that fancy parts were just parts until someone loved them into doing more than they were designed for. Alex set the piece on a square of clean cloth. He exhaled, slow. The night exhaled back. Across the city, a different quiet pressed against glass. Valerie stood barefoot in her kitchen, lights off, the refrigerator glow painting her face in cold blue. She had slipped out of the dress hours ago and pulled on an old college sweatshirt, the kind with pilled sleeves and a cracked logo, and the soft humiliation of it felt like a relief. Her phone lay on the counter, a sleek black eye staring up at her. She wanted to look away from it but couldn't. It wants to sing. "I'm teaching it the beat." She reread his message. Terrible line, objectively. The kind that would have gotten a sneer in any room she ruled, and yet it had settled somewhere beneath her ribs and warmed there, like a small animal deciding to trust her hand. She poured water, didn't drink it. Scrolled through old photos instead. Galas, yachts, rooftops, her smile so precise she could cut thread with it. She found a picture she'd taken the night she bought the Ferrari, her alone in a garage that smelled like rubber and wax and the faintest thrill of danger, her grin unpracticed and wide. She'd posted the champagne shot. She had kept this one to herself, embarrassed by the rawness in her own eyes. She thumbed out a message she didn't send. "Do you think I'm awful?" She deleted it and typed something else. "How will you know when it's right?" She watched the 3 dots come and go. Finally, when it stops explaining and starts singing, barricades shifted inside her, planners, defenses, polished excuses, like heavy furniture dragging across a floor, when it stops explaining. She set the phone down and leaned both palms on the counter, spine bowed. In the dark glass of the window, a tall woman stared back at her. She looked like a headline. She felt like a question. Back in East LA, Alex cleaned the sensor housing until it could have been mistaken for a jewel. He turned the magnifier lamp down until the bulb hummed like a low note. His tools for this kind of work were not the sort that impressed anyone. A set of calibration shims thin as breath, a jeweler's screwdriver, a soft pencil to mark a hair's width of adjustment, and the thing you couldn't buy, intuition sharpened against 1,000 stubborn problems. He made micro-movements with the fiddly focus of a watchmaker, splicing time itself. He thought of rhythm. He thought of how his mother had sung him to sleep when he was a child, pausing between verses just a fraction too long because she wanted to see if he would demand the next line or trust that it was coming. He always waited. Trust had a tempo. He reassembled the system and stepped back. The clock on the wall dragged its second hand around like it was pushing through syrup. 3 in the morning, the hour when resolve and doubt sound the same. He turned the key. The engine woke cleanly, the startup flare crisp but not showy. He rested his palm on the fender. The vibration that came up through the metal was a single muscle flexing, strong, certain. He tilted the scope toward his shoulder without looking and watched the lines parade in easy lockstep, lag folded into alignment so snugly it disappeared. No cough, no catch. A melody finding its own throat. "Sing," he said, and the car obeyed. He didn't grin or shout. He felt something quieter, more dangerous, a loosening inside him like a knot he hadn't realized he'd tied years ago giving way. He stepped around to the driver's seat, slid behind the wheel, and listened again, this time to the small noises, the idle settling like breath in sleep, the faintest whir of an electric pump, the click of relays ready to be trusted. He tapped the throttle. The rev rose like silk pulled through the fingers. He killed the engine before triumph could turn into carelessness. He sat there in the silence and allowed himself one long exhale, head tipped back against the seat, eyes closed. He remembered the laugh in the doorway, the diamonds, the way she'd said, "Marry you like a weapon." He remembered saying just Alex, like a boundary and a bridge all at once. He texted without thinking too much. "Valerie, it's ready." He left out the victory lap. He left out the poetry. The engine had said what needed saying. The reply came quicker than he expected. "Now, morning," he wrote. "You should hear it with daylight on it." He set the phone face down and scrubbed his hands until the sink ran black and then clear. He didn't sleep. He tidied. He put wrenches in their correct drawers, wiped fingerprints from the Ferrari's nose, swept up the fine dust in the corners like a man preparing a room for a guest he wanted to treat right. He brewed harsh coffee and drank it out of a chipped mug with a painted blue rooster on the side, a relic from his grandfather's kitchen. Dawn found him at the threshold, leaning against the jamb, watching the street peel itself awake. Valerie arrived without fanfare. No driver, no blow-dry perfection. Hair in a careless knot, white button-down, jeans that looked expensive because they fit without declaring it. She paused just inside the doorway as if crossing a border. The shop smelled the way it always did, oil and warm metal and something faintly sweet from a rag soaked in cutting fluid, but she seemed to breathe it like a new weather. "Is it?" she began, and then cut off the question, the way someone stops themselves from praying out loud. "Keys," he said and handed them to her. She moved with a kind of rehearsal, calm but rigid, lowering into the driver's seat like a person sitting on the edge of a confession. Her hand shook once. She hid it by reaching for the seatbelt first. Alex stood a pace back, arms loose at his sides, not wanting to pollute the moment with his own certainty. She turned the key. The engine rose, not loud, but full. It filled the space the way a good voice fills a small room, no microphone, just presence. Her eyes flicked to the take, then closed. The expression that crossed her face startled him. Not victory, not relief exactly. Recognition, like someone who had been away a long time stepping back into the house that still remembered her footsteps. She rolled a tiny bit of throttle. The rev climbed clean and fell clean. No stutter, no apology. Something in her jaw softened. "Say it," Alex said, voice low, and immediately regretted the urge to make her name the thing, but she did it anyway. "It's right," she whispered, and then corrected herself. "It's honest." He smiled at that. She sat there for a few seconds more, one hand on the wheel, one on the shifter, like a pilot reacquainting herself with gravity. When she got out, she kept the door open, unwilling to break the connection with a slam. The morning light caught the smear of oil he hadn't seen on his forearm. She saw it and, to his surprise, didn't look away. "So you did it," she said. The words should have been cold, but they warmed at the edges. "I listened," he answered. She held his gaze. The woman who had thrown a grenade of a joke 2 days ago stood in the quiet wake of her own explosion, measuring the damage. "About the bet," she said, and now her voice found the ragged place most people never let strangers hear. "I don't make promises I don't keep." He did not rescue her. He did not tease her. He gave her room. "Maybe we start with coffee," he said finally, as if proposing a compromise to fate. "There's a place down the block that burns it just right." A startled laugh slipped out of her, softer than the one that had cut him on day one, the kind you don't intend, but that betrays where you've been. "Coffee," she repeated, tasting the ordinary like it might save her. They stood there in that small, absurd peace, while the Ferrari idled behind them like a satisfied animal. The city rose around them into its usual noise, horns and voices, and the distant hiss of the freeway. Inside the shop, the old clock ticked in approval. From the street, the car looked like a miracle. From inside, Alex knew it was just time set true. This was the peak, man and machine agreeing on a single beat, two strangers agreeing to the smallest version of a promise. It didn't look like a climax. Good climaxes rarely do. They look like an engine at idle, perfect and unremarkable to anyone who doesn't know what it cost to make it hum. "Drive it," he said, nodding at the open door. "You should be the first to hear it on the road." She hesitated, then slid back in, and pulled away slow, so slow it seemed more like a bow than a departure. The red car turned the corner, and the sound it made didn't boast. It just belonged. Alex stood alone again in the threshold of his shop, the morning now fully his. He looked at his hands. He looked at the little square of cloth where an insignificant censer had rested while he asked it to be better than itself. He thought of his grandfather, of the old man's quiet faith in tiny adjustments. He thought of Valerie, of the way her voice had broken on honest. He went back inside, picked up the phone, and typed a simple message he'd never have sent 2 days ago. "Coffee's on me." Her reply came while the clock dragged its second hand forward. "Make it strong. I have a board meeting at 9. Might be the first honest thing I do today." He laughed, alone and not lonely. The day had already turned. The half-beat was gone. Outside, tires whispered on asphalt. Inside, a new rhythm settled into the workshop, the rhythm of a story that had stopped explaining and started to sing. The cafe 3 doors down didn't try to be charming. It just was, the way a scar is honest. A bell above the door gave a tired jingle when they stepped in, and the morning hit them with the smell of burnt espresso, butter, and something cinnamon that lived in the air no matter what was actually baking. A faded Dodgers pennant curled at the corners near the register. A bulletin board wore overlapping flyers, lost cats, salsa nights, community yard sales, like a quilt the neighborhood had mended together over time. They chose the small table by the window because it looked like it had a history of conversations that mattered. Alex slid his chipped mug across the surface, a ring of heat ghosting the wood. Valerie wrapped both hands around hers as if she were learning how to hold warmth without burning herself. Outside, traffic stitched itself along the street. Inside, the room ran on murmurs, spoons clinking, and the hiss of the steam wand getting tempers right. She wore the kind of white shirt you only wear if you can afford laundry to be someone else's problem. The top button was undone. No jewelry except the bracelet she hadn't bothered to remove, a horizon of small diamonds that caught light like a private sunrise. She noticed where his gaze landed and turned her wrist so it flashed less. "You weren't kidding," she said, nodding toward the coffee. "It tastes like it worked hard to be coffee." He swallowed a smile. "Strong covers a multitude of sins." "So does money," she said, and then winced, as if she'd stepped on a truth barefoot. "Sorry. I'm trying not to be." She searched for a word and found an entire class. "That person." "Which person?" he asked, not to challenge, but because he liked the way she fought for the right noun. "The one who walks into a room and thinks it's a mirror." She blew on the surface of her drink. "Everything reflecting me back at me." He let the silence breathe. He'd learned that engines and people both needed idle to find their rhythm. She took a sip, made a face, and then took another, like someone choosing what pain to keep. "My father hates this place already," she said, glancing around with a smile too quick to be unkind. "He's not here, but he's here." Her gaze settled on the bulletin board. "He thinks any room without an agenda is a waste of a room." "What's your agenda?" Alex asked. She shrugged, a movement so small it might have been a flinch. "Today, survive a board meeting without lying to myself. She tapped her fingernail softly against her mug. And to say thank you properly. You already did. He took a drink. When you said the car sounded honest. That wasn't about the car, she said, eyes still on her cup. They didn't look at each other for a while. The room held them without demanding they fill it. A bus sighed at the curb. Someone laughed too loud near the counter and apologized to no one in particular. You grew up here? She asked finally. Here, he said. And before here, a little house with a chain-link fence and a peach tree that never produced a decent peach. He smiled faintly. My grandfather opened the shop when the neighborhood had more factories than galleries. He said engines and people both hate being talked over. Your mother? Her voice had softened into curiosity, not interrogation. She sang off-key and believed in saints she argued with. She taught me that everything worth fixing deserves your respect before it earns it. He set the cup down. Yours? Valerie straightened a fraction, a habit like a uniform. Hospitals named after us, research centers with our logos. My mother loved appearances, centerpieces, seating charts, how the cameras caught the light behind a podium. She had a good heart and a busy calendar. She died when I was 19. She blinked once, a measured concession to grief. My father loved outcomes. We don't argue about saints. We argue about metrics. Metrics are just feelings in a suit, he said. She laughed, and the cafe turned its head for half a second like a bird taking note of a new sound. You always talk like that? Only when I believe someone is listening. I am, she said, and the way she said it felt like a door that had been painted shut for years, finally giving under a patient hand. The owner, a woman with a silver streak in her hair and a tattoo peeking under her sleeve, brought a plate of pan dulce without being asked. On the house, she said, sliding it down like a friendly bribe. Your red miracle made my morning. Thought you two might be the reason. She winked and drifted away. Valerie stared at the pastries with the wary hope of a person who grew up being told sugar was a weapon. I don't usually. She trailed off and tore a piece of concha with the awkward reverence of a communion. Cinnamon and butter opened in the air between them. Her eyes closed a moment, surprised by the way sweetness can be an argument against cynicism. Careful, Alex said. You might like the neighborhood. I already do. She chewed, then frowned. Which is inconvenient. For the brand? He meant it lightly. It hit like truth. For the story I've been telling, she said. She wiped a thumb across a grain of sugar on the table, then looked up, eyes sharpening, not to cut, but to focus. I Googled you. I figured. You've been offered jobs. You said no. I said not now, he corrected. There's work here that doesn't scale. My world runs on scaling, she said. If it doesn't grow, it dies. Some things grow by deepening, he said. Roots don't trend. She studied him like he was a dashboard. She was finally learning to read. If you had everything you needed, tools, space, the right clients, what would you build? A place where engines are treated like stories, he said without thinking. Not collectibles, not trophies. Stories. We'd bring them back not just to spec, but to voice, and we'd teach kids from the neighborhood that their hands know more than algorithms will admit. She exhaled a laugh that wasn't about humor. You sound like you've rehearsed that. I've rehearsed it every night I sweep the floor, he said. Something rearranged behind her face, a calculation redrawn to include a margin for wonder. She reached for her phone, then stopped herself. If I ask how much that would cost, she said, I ruin the moment. You don't ruin it, he said. You move it to a spreadsheet. Her mouth curved. Guilty. They let the thought sit, blueprints folded but visible, while the cafe breathed around them. A man in paint-stained jeans ordered 2 coffees to go. A child pressed her palms to the glass and fogged a circle, then drew a heart and a crooked lightning bolt through it. Valerie's phone buzzed on the table, face down. She ignored it. It buzzed again, then again. The bracelet on her wrist hid a pulse that seemed to speed up to match the notifications. "Go ahead," Alex said, not unkind. She flipped it over. The screen stacked messages like accusations. "Dad, board moved up, 8:30. Don't be late. PR, Jess," paparazzi tipped. "Is the bet real? Need a line? Cousin Lucas. You're trending. Not sure that's good. Unknown. Hope you insured that engine, sweetheart." The last one made her jaw harden in a way he recognized from seized bolts. She typed a reply she didn't send, deleted it, set the phone face down again, and breathed. "I'm not afraid of being seen," she said, not to convince him, but to hear it. "I'm afraid of being edited." "Then speak first," he said. "Decide what's true. What if I don't know yet?" Her eyes flashed, not with fire but with panic's bright cousin. "What if it's easier to perform a version of myself than to be whoever this is?" He didn't move to touch her. He did something rarer. He didn't flinch from the rawness. "Then you do what I did last night," he said. "You find the smallest, ugliest part of the system that tells the rest when to move. You clean it. You set it right by a hair, and you listen. And if the world doesn't hear the difference, you will," he said, "and the right people will too." Her breath left her in a slow, involuntary relinquishing. The bell over the door jingled again. 2 teenagers blew in on a gust of jokes and the smell of outside. The owner shouted hello. The city shook itself awake. Valerie checked the time and made a face. "I have to go. Let a room full of men explain my company to me," she said, gathering herself with a visible act of will. She pulled out a card, then hesitated and tucked it away. "No, that's the old way." She reached into her bag and produced a pen instead. On a napkin, she wrote a number, then a name in block letters that looked like a promise and a dare. Valerie M. She slid it across the table. No flourish. "If you ever want to talk about roots that don't trend." He looked at the napkin like it was a blueprint and a prayer. "I will." She stood, and the cafe seemed to notice her fully for the first time. Not the wealth, not the hair, not the paper armor, but the woman carrying all of that like a heavy coat she wasn't sure she needed. At the door she paused, turned back. "Alex?" "Yeah. I meant it," she said, "about promises." "I know," he said, and there was no victory in it, only recognition. She left, and the bell gave its tired blessing. He sat for a while after, finishing coffee that had gone lukewarm, because some endings deserve a quiet aftertaste. Then he paid, thanked the owner, and stepped into the street. The sun had climbed, flattening shadows, making the paint on the Ferrari across the way throw back the day like a challenge. A man in a suit slowed to stare and then pretended he hadn't. Back at the shop, Alex rolled the car inside, feeling the way the engine carried itself now, a creature that had learned its own body. He documented the work for himself, not for court. He wrote the steps in a notebook his grandfather had used, the paper stained with older, different problems. Recalibration. 3 Ms. Listen first. He underlined listen twice. By noon, the neighborhood had done what neighborhoods do. It had found out. A delivery driver stuck his head in to congratulate him. A girl from the bakery asked if she could take a picture. "With the red one, please." An older man with a cane told a story about the last time he'd heard a V12 that clean. "Barcelona, 1979, I swear the air changed." Alex let them have the moment because the moment wasn't his to hoard. The phone buzzed. This time, it was a single text that didn't belong to any of the piles in his life. Board survived, barely. Coffee was the best part. "V," he smiled and typed back without trimming himself for anyone's comfort. "Strong covers a multitude of sins. Dinner covers the rest." The 3 dots appeared, flickered, held. "Careful," she wrote. "That sounds like a promise." He looked at the napkin on his bench, the handwriting that didn't apologize. He looked at the Ferrari, idle now, perfect without boasting. He looked at his hands, clean for once, and at the door of the shop, propped open to let the day in. "Only if we set the beat together," he wrote. The reply took its time, as replies worth having do. "Then teach me to listen," she sent. "I'm tired of being edited." Outside, the street kept stitching itself. Inside, Alex slid the notebook back onto the shelf between a socket set and a framed photograph of his grandfather, standing uncomfortably next to a Buick. He turned the sign on the door from open to back in 30, even though he had nowhere to be but here, because sometimes the work is not under the hood. Sometimes the work is at a small table by a window, learning that truth has a taste, and once you've had it, everything else is just sugar. By afternoon, the city had turned bright and unforgiving, a glare that made truth squint. Valerie's name trended for the wrong reasons. Screenshots, cropped angles, captions written by people who'd never been in the room. The story was neat without being true. Heiress bets, marriage on grease monkey, fixing her toy. Comment sections treated nuance like something you could tip a waiter with and then forget. Her father called first. Of course he did. "Conference room, 15 minutes, he said, and hung up before the sentence cooled. The Mendoza building's elevator delivered her to a floor that smelled like eucalyptus and ambition. The glass walls reflected her back to herself from 10 directions. White shirt, hair gathered, expression ironed flat. The conference room was an amphitheater of polished wood and purpose. A skyline swaggered beyond the windows. Men in navy suits, women in black dresses with sharp shoulders, a legal team stacked like nesting dolls at one end. Her father stood. "We're being mocked," he said, skipping greetings. "Our name is attached to a circus." A junior VP slid an iPad toward Valerie. Headlines flashed like accusations. Heiress turns love into clickbait. Mechanic marries up, Ferrari and a fairy tale. One tab was a grainy photo of her outside the cafe, laughing. The caption read, "When the joke becomes real." Valerie placed the iPad face down like you might close a casket. "It's my car," she said evenly, "and my life." "Your life is a part of this company," her father said. "We talked to regulators this quarter. We're negotiating access in 3 countries. You think they won't ask if we run on soap operas now?" A lawyer cleared her throat. "We could issue a statement," she offered. "Clarify that the bet was an exaggerated, playful remark taken out of context, that Ms. Mendoza remains focused on corporate stewardship." "It wasn't playful," Valerie said. She felt the table through her palms, cool, expensive, indifferent. "And I'm not a steward. I'm a person." Her father inhaled as if patience were a new cardio. "Do you plan to marry the man?" Silence pooled. The room leaned toward it, eager for a headline that could be managed. Valerie's mind flickered, Alex's hands steady over a tangle of wire, the way he said, "Listen first." Coffee that tasted like honesty, the napkin with her name on it. She chose not to let the room edit her. "I plan to decide for myself," she said. A PR director scribbled something that looked like unhelpful. Her father softened his tone the way men do when strategy puts on a cardigan. "Valerie," he said, "you're smart. You know the optics. If this man wants something, he will take it. That's what people do when we bring them close." "He didn't take anything," she said. "He gave something back." "To you," her father replied, "not to the brand." "I'm not the brand," she said again, more to herself than to the room, because she could feel the old gravitational pull trying to turn her back into a logo. "I need to go." "You walk now," he warned, "and it looks like you're running from accountability." She stood anyway. "No," she said, and her voice surprised her by holding. "It looks like I'm on time for my life." She left the iPad face down and the room buzzing with sentences that would go on without her. The elevator doors slid shut on a chorus of metrics, risk, narrative control, words that tried to sound like care and landed like caution tape. Outside, the heat pressed its hand against the city. Valerie exhaled, sharp, like a tire-finding grip. She drove with both windows down, as if wind could sand off the polished edges of the morning. At a red light, a scooter pulled up beside her. The rider lifted his visor and shouted, "Nice car!" in a voice that didn't want anything from her. She rolled the windows up halfway and smiled into the rush. At Rivera Motors, the air felt 10 degrees cooler, as if metal and brick had negotiated their own weather. Alex was on a rolling stool, coaxing the stubborn belly of a '67 Camaro to admit why it had been sulking. He looked up when she came in, expression open but unassuming, like he'd been expecting the day to bring him whatever it felt like and was ready to greet it politely. "Bored?" he asked. "Still standing," she said. "Me too." He nodded and returned a bolt to a tray with a little metallic hello. "You want quiet or distraction?" "Both," she said, then laughed at the impossibility of it. "Teach me something." He handed her a pair of gloves. "Easiest win, the smell test. Burnt oil is coffee left on the burner. Fresh oil is almonds. Gear oil is a middle school locker room that lost a bet." She snorted. "And money?" "Money smells like citrus in conference rooms," he said without looking up. She leaned over the Camaro, sniffed, made a face. "Locker room. Gear oil leak," he confirmed. "You'll get good at this if you let yourself." "I don't get to be good at messy things," she said. "In my world, mess gets outsourced." "In mine, mess is where the work lives," he said. "Want to help?" He showed her the angle to hold the light so shadows didn't lie. He had her listen for the difference between a click that meant yes and a click that meant try again. He taught her the slow courage of threads catching, how not to cross them in a panic to be done. He shut up when she concentrated. He praised without sweetness when she did something right. "You're good at teaching," she said, wondering what it would feel like to be taught without being managed. "I was taught by people who liked me more than they liked being right," he said. "That kind of love makes you precise." Her phone pinged on the bench. She didn't look. The shop radio hummed a classic rock station too quietly to offend anyone. In the doorway, a woman swayed a stroller, peering in. "Is the red one the one?" she asked. "From the internet?" Valerie smiled. "It's the one," she said, surprising herself with how good it felt to own the sentence. "You two look happy," the woman said, and then laughed at her own nosiness. "Sorry, newborn. I narrate everything now." She pushed the stroller along with a whispered, "We'll come back for the smell test." When they were alone again, Alex tilted his chin toward Valerie's phone. "You can get that," he said. "I can simulate distraction by dropping a wrench near your foot." She checked the screen. A DM from PR, Jess, with a draft statement. A text from her father with a calendar invite titled Optics Strategy. A message from an unknown number containing a paparazzi shot of her at the cafe, her wrist mid-turn, diamonds caught mid-sun, captioned, "When rich meets real." She locked the phone. "What's the opposite of optics?" she asked. "Vision," he said. She sat on a stool, gloves in her lap like a student after a pop quiz. "What would it look like," she asked carefully, "if we built something together? Not a statement. A place." He didn't laugh. He didn't leap. He set the wrench down and turned to face her fully, giving the question the respect of his attention. "It would look like Stories with Engines," he said. "A school corner, a scholarship for kids who think with their hands. A clean room for the delicate work, a test bench that teaches patience, not just power, clients who value voice over resale value, a shop that pays well enough that no one has to choose between pride and rent." "And the money?" she asked, not flinching from the piece that had always been hers to move. "Money is a tool," he said, "same as a torque wrench, wrong in the wrong hands, right when it doesn't strip threads." She exhaled, a long, unscripted surrender. "I could give this place a future," she heard herself say, "not to own it, but to belong to it." Before he could answer, a shadow fell across the doorway. A man in a suit hovered at the threshold, hair shellacked, smile designed to be seen from 15 feet away. "Ms. Mendoza," he said smoothly, like they were at a gala instead of a garage. "Evan Myers, Drive Style Magazine. Got your location from a friend at the club." Alex's posture changed by a millimeter, enough to shift from open to guard without closing any doors. Valerie stood. "We don't do ambushes," she said. "Not an ambush. An opportunity," Evan said, stepping in as if the shop belonged to the public. "Cover story, love, class, and a $2 million engine. We stream behind the scenes, a happy ending arc. The internet eats it. He gets clients, you get rehabilitation. Win-win." Alex wiped his hands and didn't offer one. "Machines don't like being content," he said. Evan smiled with all teeth. "Everything's content. You of all people know that." Valerie felt the room tilt the way it does when you suddenly remember you're standing on a moving sidewalk. "No," she said. "We're good. Your father might disagree," Evan said lightly. "We have quotes. He's keen on controlling the narrative." "Then he can be on your cover," she replied, and the line warmed her ribs like a small bright fire. Evan's smile didn't break, it just cooled. "Call me when you change your mind." He left a card on the bench, the weight of it ridiculous, and stepped back into the heat. Silence refilled the shop. Alex picked up the card between two fingers and dropped it in the trash without ceremony. "Thank you," she said, meaning it for the gesture and for the way he hadn't performed a savior. "You did the heavy lifting," he said. "I just handled waste disposal." She laughed, and the sound did something the Ferrari's perfect idol had done earlier, set the air right. They worked until late afternoon, not because they had to, but because sometimes staying is what stitches a day back together. Valerie learned the choreography of cleaning and putting away. She stayed for the small sermon Alex gave about labeling bolts. "Future you is tired. Be kind to her." She stayed for the moment a customer brought in a box of donuts and called the Ferrari that red prayer. When she finally checked her phone again, there was one message she hadn't expected. "Dad, dinner, our house, tonight, no press." She showed Alex. He lifted an eyebrow that contained 3 questions and no judgment. "I should go," she said, "or it becomes a different war." He nodded. "Wear something you can breathe in." "I don't own those clothes," she said, then looked down at her jeans and Alex's gloves still in her hands. "Maybe I do." She turned the sign on the door from open to closed like a benediction. At the threshold, she hesitated. "If I bring a plan tomorrow," she said, "not marketing, a real plan, numbers, space, hiring, a scholarship line item, will you read it, not as a favor, as a partner?" He didn't smile big. He didn't make it cinematic. He gave her the dignity of a straight answer. "Yes," he said, "if it listens first." She nodded, as if a bolt had finally found its thread. "Then I'll learn to listen," she said, "and I'll bring coffee that covers a multitude of sins." She stepped into the heat that wasn't quite punishing anymore. The street stitched around her. Behind her, the shop breathed, not as refuge alone, but as a place that could become a future if 2 people set the beat together and refused to let the outside noise dictate the song. The Mendoza house didn't sit on a hill so much as it commanded one. Glass and stone and long, low lines, the kind of architecture that whispers power without having to raise its voice. The driveway curled through manicured olive trees to a portico that made cars look like toys. A valet appeared before the engine finished breathing. Valerie stepped out first. Her white button-down had been traded for a black dress that didn't apologize for being practical. Hair pulled back, small gold studs, no necklace. She looked like someone who'd chosen oxygen over performance. Alex killed the engine, pocketed the keys, and met the valet's polite stall of a smile with one of his own. He wore a clean shirt that fit his shoulders and boots that had seen real roads. He didn't tug at the collar, didn't pretend this was his weather. He simply existed in it without shrinking. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon and old money. A piece of art the size of a bedroom floated over the foyer, blue on grey, indifferent to comprehension. Footsteps on stone echoed toward them. Roberto Mendoza arrived in a navy suit that had more architecture than the house. "Valerie," he said, and kissed the air near her cheek. "Alex." The name landed on his tongue like a foreign word he'd practiced. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting us," Valerie said evenly. They moved into a living room designed for interviews. Low furniture, perfect sight lines, a view of the city performing evening. 2 women stood. A man on his phone didn't look up. "Family," Roberto said with a lawyer's economy. "Your Aunt Teresa, Uncle Miguel, Cousin Lucas." Polite smiles, assessments disguised as welcomes. Lucas finally tucked his phone away. "So you're the guy who fixed the internet," he said, grinning. "My group chat is obsessed." Alex smiled back. "I fixed a car." "Same thing now," Lucas said. "Machines, attention, whatever." A housekeeper slipped in to announce dinner. The table could have seated a council. In the center, low white flowers arranged themselves as if grown for this room. Place cards waited. Alex found his name 2 seats down from Roberto, across from Valerie. The crystal chimed when water landed. Knives glinted like they had opinions. "I hear your shop's been in the family a long time," Teresa began. Polite curiosity, polished to a shine. "3 generations," Alex said. "Grandfather to father to me." "How quaint," Miguel murmured, the word dusted with sugar and condescension. Valerie's gaze flicked, a warning no one caught. Alex cut his salmon with the kind of patience that doesn't leak. Roberto dabbed the corner of his mouth like punctuation. "Tell me, Alex, is it true you turned down a position at a performance division in Stuttgart?" "Not the right time," Alex said. "Most men would have taken it," Roberto said pleasantly. "Upward trajectory, access, prestige. Most engines don't need more revs," Alex replied. "They need better timing." A breath moved around the table, somewhere between amusement and irritation. Lucas smirked. "He talks like a documentary," he whispered to no one and everyone. "It was a compliment," Roberto said, as if he'd given one. "We admire self-possession in this family." "Do we?" Valerie asked, lifting her water. Her father's eyes slid to hers and away, as if they'd agreed to spar after dessert. Conversation nested into safer subjects for 2 courses: board appointments, a foundation gala, a senator's new bill. Alex chewed carefully and watched the room the way he watched engines, who idled, who surged, who masked misfires with volume. Valerie answered when addressed, offered nothing to be weaponized, and took quiet pleasure in watching Alex not perform. Dessert arrived as a thing that looked like a sculpture and tasted like a secret. Roberto set down his spoon with a soft decision. "Shall we talk plainly?" Valerie's shoulders squared, but Alex spoke first. "Sure." Roberto folded his hands over the linen. "My daughter is valuable," he said, letting the word sit with all its implications. "To this family, to our company, to the causes we fund. Your relationship," he spaced the syllables like fragile crystal, "has created noise. Noise, unfortunately, has cost." Valerie's jaw ticked. "Dad, I'm speaking to Alex," Roberto said without looking at her. Then, returning to his guest with a warmth that didn't heat, "I don't believe you are malicious. I believe you are earnest. Earnest men are dangerous because they underestimate the games they are in. And practiced men are dangerous because they pretend it's not a game," Valerie said softly. Roberto's smile thinned. He reached down, lifted a slim leather folder and set it beside his plate. "Alex," he said, sliding it across the table so it came to rest by the mechanic's hand. "This is a clean path." Alex didn't touch it. "It is," Roberto continued unbothered. "A 7-figure investment into Rivera Motors. No strings on paper, new lifts, a clean room, permits expedited. We position you as a community partner. In exchange, and now the knife showed through velvet, you will announce that upon reflection, you and my daughter are not pursuing a personal relationship. To protect her, of course, to protect your reputation from misunderstandings. You will sign a standard confidentiality agreement, no interviews, no monetizing of the story. We will ensure the right clients find you. Your shop will flourish. And this, he gestured vaguely toward the air, where the internet lives, will pass. Silence drew itself taut. The flowers smelled like nothing. Valerie stared at her father as if he were a stranger borrowing her father's face. You're buying him off. I'm protecting you, Roberto said, like that excuse had ever failed him. This city eats men like him. It will not eat my daughter. Alex looked at the folder and then at Roberto, steady in a way that made the room feel underdressed. And if I say no? Roberto's eyes cooled half a degree. Then I regret to inform you that our legal team has already identified vulnerabilities, zoning anomalies, an old lien on your lot that should have been satisfied but wasn't, an environmental inspection your father put off and then forgot. Nothing criminal, just leverage, the kind of pressure that collapses small buildings over time. Valerie's chair scraped back an inch. Enough. Roberto didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. I built a life where bad outcomes happen to other people, he said. I will not apologize for keeping it that way. Aunt Teresa cleared her throat into a napkin. Miguel reached for his wine like it might hide him. Lucas's phone vibrated again, and he stared at it, as if it was suddenly a moral object. Alex closed his hand around the leather without opening it. He didn't flinch. He didn't posture. He found Valerie's eyes across the table and held them the way you hold a steering wheel on black ice. Firm, calm, present. May I speak with your daughter alone? He asked. Roberto considered the request as if it were a move on a board. The terrace, he said finally, with the grace of a man granting permissions he already resented. The night outside wore the city like jewelry. A mild wind pressed its hand to Alex's back. Valerie walked to the ledge and put both palms on the stone, as if asking the house to cool her. For a moment, neither spoke. Crickets practiced their small violins. Down the hill, a pool glowed like a shallow star. Are you okay? Alex asked, quiet enough that the glass doors wouldn't steal it. No, she said, honest as a bruise. But I can still think. He held up the folder. This isn't about us, he said. This is about control he can't perform in public. It's about fear, she said. His looks like control. Mine looks like this. She exhaled. If you take it, I won't forgive you. If you don't, he won't forgive me. He stepped closer until their shoulders nearly touched, the air between them a thin, pulsing thing. I don't need his money, he said, but my shop might need protection from the kind of pressure you can't see. He turned the folder over once, twice, like a mechanic weighing a part that could ruin a system if installed wrong. I won't let him bulldoze what my grandfather built. Then don't take his leverage, she said. Take his power, on our terms. He looked at her profile, the hard, elegant line of a woman who'd been trained to be a statue and was choosing to be a person instead. He had the sudden, absurd thought that courage had a taste, and it was metal and lemon. Valerie slid her hand across the stone until her fingers found his. She didn't squeeze. She anchored. Whatever you decide, she said, decide as the man who taught an engine to sing, not as a man being edited. He nodded, a small tilt that meant more than a speech. He lifted the folder, opened it. Thick paper, expensive ink, a future engineered to look inevitable. He read faster than he let on. The non-compete clause glowed like a tripwire. The NDA read like an eraser. He closed it gently and set it on the terrace wall. Okay, he said. Okay what? Her voice steadied. "Okay, we write our own offer," he said, and for the first time that night a grin, the half-moon kind, slipped out. "We accept the investment. We reject the eraser. We add a scholarship fund with your name and my grandfather's, a community apprenticeship program, a clause that bars interference with zoning and inspections, and a joint press statement that says nothing about romance and everything about craft." He looked at her. "We choke his leverage with transparency. And if he says no, then we make noise on purpose," he said. "The kind that isn't scandal, the kind that's vision." The glass door opened. Roberto stepped onto the terrace, flawless as a contract. "Well?" Alex picked up the folder and held it out, not surrendering but returning a tool that didn't fit. "Thank you," he said. "Here's my counter." He outlined it in clean sentences. No elbows, no apology. Valerie watched her father's face perform nothing for once. Roberto took his time. He measured the man across from him the way he measured deals that came without pedigree. "You think you can dictate terms from a garage," he said at last. "I think I can dictate terms about my life," Alex said. "The garage is just where I learned how." Roberto's mouth curved into something that wasn't a smile and wasn't not. "I'll have my team draft a response." "Do that," Valerie said, "and send it to me." He looked at his daughter, and for a fleeting second, something human cracked through. Fatigue, maybe. Love, complicated beyond language. "You're choosing difficulty," he said. "I'm choosing accuracy," she replied. They re-entered the lighted dining room, where the flowers still pretended to smell like something. Teresa straightened. Miguel poured himself a mercy. Lucas had finally put his phone face down. "Everything settled?" he asked, ferreting for gossip he could sell at breakfast. "Not yet," Valerie said, and the words felt like a horizon. Alex set his hand at the small of her back as they crossed the room. Not possession, just direction in a crowded space. At the foyer, a footman appeared with their things like magic learning manners. Before the valet brought the car, Roberto joined them by the door. He lowered his voice. "One piece of advice, Alex." "I'm listening," Alex said. "In my world," Roberto said, "men who don't take the money rarely get a second offer." Alex nodded. "In mine," he said, "men who take the wrong money spend the rest of their lives fixing what it broke." He opened the passenger door for Valerie. She paused, met her father's eyes, and let him see the life she would rather fail at than succeed in by someone else's measurements. They drove away into a night that belonged to both of them and to neither. At the end of the street, a camera flash popped from behind a hedge, white, sudden, hungry. Valerie didn't duck. Alex didn't swear. They kept going. Back at the house on the hill, Roberto stood alone in the foyer. He looked at the leather folder on the console table, then at the city glittering like a field of traps. He made a call. "Draft the counter," he said, "and find out everything about a lien on Rivera's lot. I want to know who holds it and what they cost to make it go away, if I decide I want it to." On the road, Valerie's phone buzzed. Unknown number. A single sentence slid onto the screen. "Nice counter. Let's see if you can keep tempo when the beat changes." Alex caught the glow. "Who?" She turned the screen so he could read. The number had no name. The threat had style. He tightened his grip on the wheel. "Looks like Chapter 7 just found us." The threat arrived with sunrise, a yellow notice taped to the shop door like a bruise. Emergency inspection. Environmental compliance. A signature scissored the bottom. The paper fluttered in the weak morning breeze, as if uncertain of its own authority. Alex pulled it off gently, as if it might rip the paint if he yanked. He read it twice, then a third time, to make sure the words didn't rearrange themselves into something kind. A neighbor pushing a cart of flowers slowed at the curb. "Problem?" "Just a rhythm test," he said, folding the notice as if it were a map he refused to follow. Inside, the silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like the moment before a misfire. He switched on the lights. Half of them didn't come. He checked the panel. The main breaker sat obediently at on. A fresh lockout tag dangled from the meter outside. Utility order, temporary, for safety. Safety had started to sound like a synonym for control. Valerie arrived with a tote bag and a face set to work, not war. Jeans, white shirt, hair tied back like a truce. She carried a stack of papers clipped with deliberate neatness. "I brought you a plan," she said, then saw the dim room. "And the day brought us a problem." He handed her the notice. She scanned, then looked up, jaw shifting the way it did when she refused to swallow something bitter. "This is surgical," she said. "Not a hit, a pressure point. The smallest part that tells the system when to move," he said. She set the plan on the counter, opened it like an operating tray. Line items, timelines, a scholarship fund with 2 names, Mendoza Rivera Apprenticeship, and a budget column that treated dignity like a non-negotiable expense. The last page was a draft of their transparency clause. Any funding conditioned on public silence would be refused. "I thought last night was the hard part," she said. "It was practice," he answered, and meant it. At 10 on the dot, 2 inspectors in safety vests arrived with the choreography of people used to being obeyed. Clipboards, polite voices, cameras that documented not just evidence, but posture. They checked solvent storage, waste drums, ventilation, spill kits, manifests older than Alex. One paused at a hairline crack in the concrete, like a fortune teller reading a palm. The other asked if the shop had ever had a preliminary violation in the last decade or any decade. "My father deferred an inspection once," Alex said. "He was sick. He planned to reschedule." The inspector nodded like a therapist. Paperwork forgets sooner than systems. They found nothing they could celebrate, and just enough to justify the yellow notice lingering in spirit. "Temporary hold," one said. "We'll need to see corrective action on a few items." He curled a page like a smile. "Back to work in a week, maybe 2. 2 weeks is oxygen on a countdown," Valerie said after they left. Alex reached for calm, the way you reach for a wrench you know by weight. "Then we give the story a different beat." "How?" she asked. He looked at the Ferrari, its red quiet like a held breath. "We stop letting other people narrate our noise." By noon, the internet had found them again. A drone whined over the alley like a mechanical mosquito. A black SUV idled across the street, windows glossy with curiosity. Evan, from Drive Style, stood under an umbrella someone else held, sunglasses reflective as a shield. He wasn't smiling, he was hungry. "Looks like the beat changed," he called. "Want help keeping tempo?" "No," Valerie said, stepping into the doorway beside Alex. "We're good at counting." "Counting doesn't trend," Evan replied. He tipped his chin at the yellow notice. "But drama does." "Truth streams better," she said, and held up her phone. They went live. Not with lighting, not with makeup, not with a script. The camera framed the shop as it was, tools like a disciplined army, stained concrete, a desk that had learned to forgive coffee rings. Alex stood where he worked and told the story of a calibration. He explained small systems in words the neighborhood could understand, how a sensor, 3 milliseconds off, could make a symphony stumble. He showed the labeled trays, the spill kit, the manifest dates. He didn't whine. He didn't plead. He taught. Valerie didn't perform wealth repentance or messiahhood. She introduced the apprenticeship line item and said, "We will publish the full budget." She said, "We will comply with the inspection, and we will not trade silence for funding." She said, "This shop is where my name learns to mean something," and left it there, naked and true. Comments poured in like weather, some cruel, some bored, some curious, many kind. A local teacher wrote, "My seniors would kill for a tour." A woman in a lab coat avatar said, "Compliance consultant here. I'll donate hours." Someone with a tiny following and a huge heart wrote, "That hum is what honesty sounds like." The city's algorithm hiccuped, recalibrated, and carried them to phones that hadn't asked for them and decided to keep them anyway. At 3, a courier arrived with a manila envelope and a smirk he didn't earn. Notice of default. Lion acceleration. A number sat on the page like a dare. The lien traced back through a shell company to a P.O. box that smelled, even on paper, like cologne and litigation. Valerie read it and went still. Then she smiled in a way that did not invite comfort. "They're playing percussion now," she said. "We can, too." They called the community bank that held the original mortgage, the neighborhood councilwoman who'd once brought her car in and paid cash because she liked the way Alex talked to her. They called a reporter who'd done a story on predatory liens and didn't wear sunglasses indoors. They stapled the notice to their transparency clause and posted both with the caption, "If someone wants to shut us up, they'll have to do it at the same volume we're speaking." By evening, the hold felt less like a choke and more like a pause between movements. The shop became a small concert hall. People stopped by, a baker with a box of empanadas that steamed like forgiveness, a retired machinist who offered to machine a drain pan rack to make an inspector happy, a teenage girl in a hoodie who asked, "Can I see the thing that was off by 3? What did you call them?" "Milliseconds," Alex said, and placed the sensor in her palm like a relic. "You can hear it if you learn how to listen with your hands." She closed her eyes and smiled like yes. When the sun dropped, the drone had left, but the SUV hadn't. Its engine idled in a way that told Alex the driver hadn't learned to love machines. Evan had disappeared. In his place came something colder, a man without a camera, just a posture. He didn't cross the street. He didn't have to. Inside, near the bench, a small sabotage revealed itself with the quiet drama of a hairline fracture, a cut in a harness sleeve on the Camaro, so precise it looked like a surgeon who hated engines had done it. No theft, no mess, just intent winking like a blade. Alex lifted the harness with 2 fingers. "They want us to misfire in public," he said. Valerie stood beside him, the tote bag at her feet now holding nothing but receipts. "Then we fix it in public," she said. They rolled the Camaro to the threshold, where the streetlight pooled. They set a shop lamp and invited anyone still lingering to watch how threads catch when you don't force them. Alex narrated not the sabotage, but the repair. He spoke like a man refusing to let harm be the headline. Valerie held the light with the exact angle he'd taught her so shadows wouldn't lie. The teenage girl asked if she could hand him the heat shrink. He let her. When the splice held, a small cheer rose, not viral, not cinematic, human. At 9, a text from an unknown number blinked into Valerie's phone. "Nice stream. Watch your back door." Alex moved before the chill could finish climbing his spine. The back door stood closed, locked, and perfectly fine. The alley was empty. He scanned the gate, the lock, the frame. Someone had tried and failed to pick it. The scratches were fresh. He breathed once, twice, slow, and the breath left him as something useful, clarity. "We're not closing," he said. "We're not pretending either," she answered. They drafted a simple schedule on the whiteboard. Open shop hours, tours at 11, 1, 3, apprenticeship interest at 4, compliance work all day. Valerie added, "Community night, tomorrow, 7 p.m. Bring questions." Alex added smaller, "Bring ears." Before they left, he turned the Ferrari over once. The engine rose, even full, without conceit, the sound of a line finally drawn straight. He cut the ignition, and the silence that rushed in felt earned. On the sidewalk, the night had sharpened. Somewhere a siren stitched the dark. Valerie stood with her hands in her back pockets, shoulders loose for the first time since the yellow notice. "I keep thinking," she said, "about your mother's rule. Respect before it's earned." "It saves threads," he said. "It saves people," she corrected. They locked up, 2 locks now, and a camera pointed not at fear, but at facts. As they walked toward her car, the black SUV's engine rose half an octave like a question mark. A window lowered an inch. A voice that liked its own echo floated out. "Tempo's cute," it said. "Let's see you keep it when the drummer leaves." The window rose. The SUV pulled away, no plates on the bumper, as if anonymity were an outfit you could buy. Valerie looked at Alex. "They think they're the drummer." He shook his head. "Engines carry their own beat." They parted at the corner with a brief touch that wasn't show, wasn't promise, an alignment check. He watched her taillights climb the street and vanish. He turned back to the shop and stood for a moment with his hand on the shutter, palm against corrugated metal, as if checking a pulse. His phone buzzed. A message from the councilwoman. City Hall. 8 a.m. "Bring your documents, and bring her." Another from the compliance consultant. "Got your back. Wear closed-toe shoes." He smiled because of how ordinary that last line was. Ordinary had started to taste like a luxury. He pulled the shutter down and listened to it rattle into place, a sound that had always meant days over. Tonight it meant beginning of the next movement. Across the street, a new yellow notice glowed under the streetlight, taped to the pole like a dare. Notice of eviction. 72 hours. It wasn't for him. It was for the bodega on the corner, the place that had lent him a broom in a rainstorm and refused payment for coffee on his worst day. The shell company's name was on that one too. He took a photo. "Okay," he said to the dark, to the city, to the engine of the story. Chapter 8. And the night, like a machine that finally understood its own timing, answered with a clean, undeniable hum. City Hall looked like a machine that had swallowed a cathedral. Marble warmed by footsteps, brass rails polished by insistence, a rhythm of doors opening and closing like valves. Alex and Valerie stepped in with a folder fattened by truth. Receipts, manifests, photos, a printout of their transparency clause with coffee stains that made it feel lived in. She wore a blazer that didn't hide her spine. He wore work boots that clicked too loud on stone and refused to apologize. Councilwoman Reyes met them at the security line with a smile that had done real work. "You brought your facts?" she asked. "And our ears," Valerie said. A compliance consultant in a too-bright tie joined them, waving forms like flags. "I like what you posted," he said to Alex. "No drama, just diagrams." They sat before a small panel in a room that believed microphones made truth truer. The inspectors who had written the yellow notice kept their eyes professional. Alex spoke first, not defensive, not meek, just precise. He mapped the shop like a heart on an X-ray, pointed to a crack in the floor that would be sealed by afternoon, held up the new drain pan rack the retired machinist had dropped off at dusk. He explained the difference between theater and safety with sentences that asked to be trusted, not admired. Valerie followed, and the air changed. "Our name is on medicine," she said. "I'm proud of that. Today our names are on a budget." She slid the apprenticeship page forward. She read the clause about refusing money that required silence and didn't look away from the word refuse. She didn't say the word father. She didn't have to. The ghost of last night sat in the chair beside her and listened. The inspector who'd read cracks like palms sighed, not exasperated but relieved. "Corrective action plan approved," he said, signing with a flourish a little too theatrical for a man who scorned theatre. "Hold lifted upon verification. 48 hours." On the steps outside, the day was a brass symbol. Reporters waited, but so did neighbors. Baker, flour-dusted, the teenager in the hoodie, the bodega owner with tired eyes. Evan, from Drive Style, leaned against a column, sunglasses like a mask at noon. He tilted his head, offering a microphone the way a street magician offers a card. Valerie took it briefly and handed it to the bodega owner. "His notice matters too," she said. "We stand together." The bodega owner swallowed and spoke in the plain math of rent and years and light bills, and how a street stays itself, because people stubbornly say hello to the same bell above the same door. Reyes put a hand on his shoulder and said, "My office is on this." Evan's cameraman caught it because the lens liked faces that didn't know it was looking. By afternoon, Rivera Motors was back under its own weather. The yellow notice had left a square of cleaner paint behind, a ghost outline of pressure that made the door look newly proud. Alex rolled up the shutter and the shop breathed. Solvent and warm metal and an optimism that didn't embarrass itself. The whiteboard announced Community Night, 7 p.m. Bring questions, bring ears. They prepared like people who knew that preparation is how you honor luck. Chairs borrowed from the church, folding tables aligned with the kind of care that keeps bolts from getting lost. Valerie hung a poster that looked like a blueprint and read like a promise. Mendoza Rivera apprenticeship, paid training, college credit, real work. She didn't put her photo on it. She put a wrench. At 6:58, the first row filled with faces you only see when you bother to earn them. By 7:10, the sidewalk had become an aisle. At 7:15, a black SUV idled across the street. It did not come closer. Alex walked to the front without a microphone, and the room quieted the way metal quiets when you touch it right. He told a story about his grandfather teaching him to align a distributor by ear. He said, "I thought that was a trick. It was a respect." He held up the sensor that had been 3 milliseconds wrong and placed it on the table like a ring. You don't always need bigger. You need truer. Valerie took a breath and stepped forward into a silence that had decided to be kind. "My old life measured wins by headlines," she said. "Now I measure them by names." She gestured to the bodega owner, the retired machinist, the teacher, the teenager. "We are going to build something that doesn't trend. It lasts." Questions rose and were answered. A boy asked if engines have favorite songs. Alex said, "Yes." And the room laughed until it believed him. The compliance consultant explained secondary containment like a bedtime story for adults. Reyes pushed a clipboard through the rows. Volunteer hours, mentors, tutors, welders, Spanish speakers. Hands wrote themselves down. Then the night asked for its turn. The back gate rattled once, hard, like someone trying a lock with impatience instead of skill. Heads turned. A hush fell that wasn't fear. It was readiness. Alex moved without hurry to the alley. The gate held. Fresh scratches glittered under the security light like cheap jewelry. The black SUV's engine rose, put itself in gear, slid away. When he re-entered, Valerie was at the bench with the teenager and an old VCR she'd brought from home because she wanted to learn to take apart something that wasn't expensive. "Teach me threads," she said loud enough for the room to hear. Alex smiled at the VCR like it had a soul. They didn't let the interruption win. They tuned the night back to the pitch they'd chosen. The teenage girl soldered a joint steady as a heartbeat while the room cheered like people watching a record fall. The baker served coffee that forgave and little cups of flan that asked nothing in return. Evan stood at the threshold with his sunglasses in his shirt, for once just a man with eyes. At 9, the moment arrived with no herald, just a familiar silhouette in the doorway, backlit by streetlight. Roberto Mendoza, alone, tie loosened, a human smudge on immaculate power. Conversations dipped. Valerie didn't step back. She stepped forward. Roberto took in the room, chairs, parts on towels, a senator's staffer scribbling notes, his daughter holding pliers like a pen that could revise the night. He looked older under the shop's new lights, the expensive kind bought at a discount because a cousin knew a guy. He cleared his throat. "I withdrew the lien," he said to the room, and then to Alex and Valerie specifically. "I should never have let anyone place it." A small sound went through the crowd, part relief, part disbelief. The bodega owner lifted his chin. "And ours?" Roberto looked at Reyes. "I don't control that one," he said. "But I know who does." He slipped a card across the table with a name and a number that bought things better than flowers. "I'll make calls." Valerie didn't smile. She didn't spare him. "And the investment?" she asked. He took out a folder, not leather this time, just manila, soft at the edges. No NDA, no non-compete, scholarship funded for 5 years, apprenticeship line item at your numbers. He paused, a man discovering what his voice sounded like when it wasn't amplified by a boardroom. And a board seat for Reyes, not for me. The room didn't applaud. It did something better. It exhaled. A mechanic in the back said, "That's clean." The teenager whispered, "Good tempo." Alex stepped forward and shook Roberto's hand, not for a photo, for the system. "Thank you," he said. Roberto held a heartbeat longer than was comfortable, and then let go. Evan watched from the door and put his sunglasses back on, not to hide, just to remember who he was. He slipped away before anyone could ask him to stay. Paperwork was signed with a pen that had written more dangerous sentences. The compliance consultant stamped a form with an enthusiasm that embarrassed his tie. Someone turned the radio up gently, and the shop filled with an old song that had learned to survive utility changes and seasons when it fell out of fashion. Alex walked to the Ferrari and looked at Valerie, not asking, just offering. She nodded. He turned the key. The engine rose with the humility of certainty. He backed the car out slowly into the night. The street made room. "Take it," he said. Valerie slid behind the wheel, the shop lights catching in her pupils like constellations. She eased the car forward, and the crowd parted, not like royalty was passing, but like a promise was keeping itself. She drove to the end of the block and back, the idle settling like a satisfied breath when she stopped. She got out and stood door open, hand on the roof. "It's honest," she said again, and this time she wasn't just talking about the car. Alex stood beside her and let the quiet work. Reyes lifted a paper cup. "To small adjustments," she said. "That changed the whole rhythm. To people," the teenager added, "who listen first." They cleaned up slowly, because good nights deserve a gentle ending. Chairs went back to the church van. The poster stayed taped to the wall. The bodega owner tucked Roberto's card into a wallet that had seen better days and better days ahead. Roberto left alone, past the black SUV that was no longer there. Before they pulled down the shutter, Alex and Valerie stood for a minute just inside the door. He brushed a smudge of solder from her cuff. She kissed his knuckles, not dramatic, just accurate. "What now?" he asked. "Now we build," she said. "And we don't let anybody edit the beat." He set the shutter down. It rattled into place like a signature. Outside, the city kept time. Inside, a promise hummed. Love didn't announce itself with fireworks. It kept an engine true and a room honest and a girl's first solder joint clean. In a world that tried to buy silence, they'd purchased noise on purpose, the good kind, the kind that becomes music. If this story struck a chord, if it reminded you that sometimes the smallest calibration changes a life, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Share it with someone who needs a little courage today. And if you want more stories that keep the beat when the world won't, subscribe so you don't miss the next one.